in the last video, we discussed asking guest speakers to facilitate an activity. Another type of session that would work really well is if the participants were given a task to complete beforehand, because then you can ask the guest speaker to review their work. So Susan, can you tell us more about how can the speaker prepare for this type of session?
This is one, Eva, that I find it can be very powerful because it meets the speaker where they're at. It introduces a way in which speakers and the participants can interact without needing to find a form of relevance if the facilitator has had a chat with them before. So I'll give you one example of where this has worked really well. You have somebody in HR, and you have somebody in HR who's coming in as a guest speaker, and they're reviewing the cover letter of an audience's work. So I've done this in an environment, let's say, where you have people who are at an early stage in their career, for example, and they write a cover letter and they make all of the typical mistakes, right? For example, dear Eva, I would love to work in your company because it would be a great opportunity for me, and it's all about me, me, me. Whereas, of course, what the employer wants to see is, well, what are you going to bring to the table? But instead of putting up a PowerPoint and saying, here are the top 5 do's as distinct to don'ts, is instead by actually pointing out, Mary, I noticed that you said that you used the word I 5 times in your opening paragraph. Let's think about how that could be changed to a you. And when you're doing this for a number of people, then everybody can learn the best practice based on what other people are doing and what they're getting from it. Another one that works very well if you have a big group of people is if you have a range of people who have come together and they've produced an infographic. And that infographic is made up of a collage of images that everybody has worked on independently. So let's say that you have a group of 50 and you are splitting those into groups of 5, and those 5 people have to come up with a list of questions, and they survey other people in the room, online or in person, and then they have to draw a pie chart on a bigger sheet. And then the person who comes in actually walks around and looks at each of those infographics. And also, of course, if you have a group of 50, it's much better if there's more than one person walking around and doing that. I've done that as well with groups, and there can be a great sense of brilliant accountability. So there's not just, well, we're doing this for the purpose of the exercise. There is that we have something to tangibly talk about with the person who's going to come in and review our research or our findings or our thoughts about this or the group's thoughts about this, etc. So this can work really well, Eva. You instantly have a sense of rapport. There's a sense of pride in putting forward somebody's work, but in particular, in a learning and development environment, I find this works super well when you want to take away that sense of you're only doing it because this is the activity between 3 and 4 o'clock on a Friday, and instead there's a much greater sense of accountability and outcome because you're showing this to somebody who is maybe very well known, very well versed in that area, etc. I find this one works really well.
I do think that's a great activity as well, because it also gives the guest speaker a chance to provide personalized feedback to the participants. So that ties in with my next question, which is how can the speaker provide feedback to the participants?
I think it's super important that the facilitator or the guest speaker knows what's coming. Like in the case of where I ran that with somebody in HR, I had told her, everybody here is going to be writing a cover letter, and I was, as the facilitator, setting the expectation that it would be 1 page long and no more, for example. I also pointed out a specific recruitment agency where I was going to ask those people to look on jobs and to be applying for them there, so that she would have a sense of the type of jobs that they were going to be applying for. And then I also said, think about if you were to come in and simply present on best practice in that area, what are the top 5 things that you would say? And make sure and point those out in your feedback. So what I would say about this is, number 1, know what's going to be happening and kind of scope out the parameters with the facilitator beforehand. And then number 3, think about what you would say if there was nothing provided to you. And then that will give you an easy go-to in terms of providing feedback then to those people.
And what additional advice, tips, or techniques does the speaker offer to enhance the quality of the participants' work?
I always think this comes back to the basics. And I know this sounds obvious, and it's hard to talk about basics when you don't necessarily know what they are. But let's say that I am talking about a pitch for raising money, right? Let's just say what needs to be there. The value proposition needs to be there, not overloading the pitch deck with loads and loads of text. having market research that is real and where you've spoken to actual or potential customers. So I often think by giving people the basics to work off, you can always be sure that the basics are going to work. Again, Eva, I know I've said this in other videos, but telling stories, people love stories, and they don't just love good stories, they love stories about where things went wrong. Like in that person where she came in from a HR perspective, I said, tell us as well about cover letters where you instantly threw them in the bin. The minute that I talk about that, Eva, that will get people's attention far more than tell me about, the cover letter that passes. And of course, the other one is, have you ever read a cover letter where you wanted to offer somebody a job straight away? Because they're extremes and people want to totally avoid one and potentially be the other. So you can't beat a good story, and a story of experience where there's tension or where there's an outlier built in. That always helps.
That's some great advice, Susan. Hopefully our guest speakers will find it useful when it comes to reviewing the participants' work.